The Mystery of BELICENA VILLCA. Second Book. The Letter of BELICENA VILLCA. 42nd Day. All that present in Poitiers, the lords of the Dog, and Guillaume Plagian, Guillaume of Nogret, Guillaume Imber of Paris, and Clement V, the man of stone Charles of Tarsus, and the Hyperborean initiates, and the King of France, Philip the Fair, agreed in that the major possibilities to triumph over the enemy depends from the employment of a secret weapon, the astuteness. The astuteness is the volitional result of an animal instinct and characterizes the animal man behavior, that is to say, the man provided with body and created soul. But also exist men, who possess uncultured spirit, although in the majority of the cases this is submersed in the created soul, and for this reason, it is said that those men are spiritually asleep. They can also manifest the animal astuteness, due to, the asleep spirit or strategically confused is unable to avoid it. But, something very different occurs when man is effectively spiritual, what can only be affirmed if it treats about an initiated in the Hyperborean wisdom. In this case, his behavior is reigned by the honor, and not only lack from astuteness, but from any other animal characteristic of the animal man, as the cowardice, foul mouth, the infidelity, the lie, the envy, the calumny, the insidiousness, the treason, etc. But, what is honor of the Hyperborean initiate? The act of his gracious will, that is to say, the act of his eternal spirit, which is pure grace. No one of the present, for example, had astuteness in their personality, due to, the honor had guided them, along all their lives. And now they have demonstrated an act of the highest honor, when frightening with all their forces for the triumph of the pact of blood. But, the Galene knew this, and they countered with the naivety of the Hyperborean initiates, to defeat them. They, otherwise, were pure astuteness, and their main weapon was called deceit, palette reflect of the great deceit, with which God the One, disguised his miserable creation. Since then that they would never expect an astute reaction from the initiates, to whom they always believed disposed to be deceived and betrayed. They would betray once, at the beginning. They mocked, twisting the mouth, and will ever be betrayed. They pretend to be roosters, and they are just stupid poultry chickens. With their honor of another world, sooner or later, they will offer us their back, and then our daggers of this world will end, with the honor of the Hyperborean initiates. According to the principles of the war, the beliefs of the enemy are the feebleness that can be exploited in our own advantage. The Hyperborean initiates lacked from astuteness, but they knew what the astuteness was, and they could employ it as a strategic arm to surprise the enemy. Here is the concept that was defined in Poitiers. If the Gaulians believed that their enemies would act with honor, and they were warned about it, then the ingenuous would be them. Then, they could be deceived by means of the astuteness that they didn't expect, and guided to a mortal trap. And the honor of the initiates would remain safe, due to, nothing in their spirits would change, neither affect their strategic orientation towards the origin. In the midst of a war action, the initiates would have played with the illusion of the created world. They fell in the simply enchantment of the initiates, that could only be qualified as an exploitation of the enemy error, something perfectly legitimate according to the laws of the war. If the Templars would have been attacked from all the flanks at the same time, with security they would have defended themselves, with unpredictable results. On the contrary, if the attack came ostensibly from the field of the King of France, while from the side of the Pope, in whom they should trust, founded protection, they would have disregarded such flank, and would be fatally defeated. The strategic astuteness would consist in the achievement of the trust in the Pope, to make that he could give them, unarmed, to the King of France. In other words, the strategy would demand to mount a scene with a sufficient realism as to deceive the Gaulians. At the beginning, they would not have to suspect the argument of the comedy. After the outcome, that would not matter anymore. The main actors would be the Pope, and the King of France. The Pope would feign to proceed in good faith, but he would demonstrate to be fearing the real reprisals. He would make promises, and would try to gain the trust of the enemy, who would believe him a friend. Philip the Fair, by his part would represent the ambitious and intolerant tyrant, attempting to draw to himself all the attention of the enemy. This would to the role of Clement V. When all was ready and Poetes was lifted the curtain, and started the first act of the drama. This one began with the publication of a crusade against Andronicus Palaiologos, Emperor of Constantinople, who was accused to maintain the schism of the Greek Church. Since the fall of Acre, the Order of the Temple had retired to Cyprus, where they sustained a regular garrison. Meanwhile, the Hospitaller Order did their own in Isle of Rhodes. With the finality to establish their participation in the crusade, Clement V cited in France the great master of the temple Jacques of Melli. Once in his presence, with total ingenuity, the Pope manifested his intention to fulfill the old idea of Gregory IX, to fuse all the military orders. Such idea, of course, caused terror on the Templars, due to the integration with an exoteric order would unveil their secrets. Without suspecting the ambush, the Great Master would attempt to persuade the Pope about the inconvenience of such a measure. According to his impression, would not be difficult to deceive as simple-minded as Clement V. After the dementil fall of the Gallene Boniface VIII, the Gallenes were warned about the offensive of the Dominicanes, and they knew what to expect in regard to the election of Clement V. Nevertheless, they considered that he was just an instrument of Philip the Fair, and his environment of sons of darkness. The impression of the great Gallene, Jacques of Melli, confirmed it. The Pope was vulnerable to the effective influence. The Great Master would dedicate again the amity of the Pontiff, without imagining that in Paris, Nogret and Guillemimber were preparing his ruin. And in a few months, Clement V would achieve that the Gallene chief distrusted not of his good faith. Enguerrand of Marigny and Guillem of Nogret were raised to the most important positions of France, coadjutor of the kingdom and seal-keeper of the king, respectively. With this power, they launched a secret operation that had as objective the execution of a simultaneous and effective action in the whole kingdom. Such action was fulfilled in 13 of October 1307, when all the Templar Knights of France, including their Great Master, were arrested under the accusation of heresy. In reality, the accumulated charges of Nogret were many and varied, but it was emphasized in the heresy to obtain the intervention of the inquisitorial tribunal, which in France was chaired by Guillemimber of Paris. Thereupon, the strategic success of the Dominicanus was seen. While the Great Master received requests of the knights to resist the arrest, and he hesitated about the attitude to assume, Guillem of Plagen sent him a message where the Pope guaranteed his help and advised him to renounce in the defense of the order, and the submission to his will. Was in this way how the Great Master ordered all the knights to surrender, and he trusted in papal intervention. Furthermore, according to what the Gallenes believed, they still had enough influence into the order of Dominican preachers. Philip the Fair wasted no time. Without resistance, his troops occupied all the Templar properties. The terror was installed in the enemy order. Hundreds of knights and monks were incarcerated. By this strong procedure no one doubted about the severity of the accusation, and soon was achieved to gather enough witnesses and proofs as to assure its liquidation. Apart from the Inquisition, Philip the Fair convoked the provincial councils to the University of Paris and the General States to judge the order. Thereby, when his diabolic fundament was emerging from the darkness, the whole people of France would assist to the exhibition of the secret Templar philosophy, and would know their depraved customs. Is what occurred during the 3 years of public process, when the amazement, the repugnance, and the horror of the French knew no limits. Not the most amazing was perhaps, that during that lapse the Templars continued believing that a saviour act by the Pope would set them free from the condemned. In the process was achieved to prove that the Templars professed the next ideas and customs. First, the high dignitaries of the order sustained that Christ, to whom they mysteriously called Nathan, had been an impostor, and not the real God. Second, Christ was never crucified, for the redemption of mankind. Third, the cross would not be, then, the instrument of their passion, but a creation of the own Neptune Christ, which they named Vrune. Fourth, all the knights, whatever their grade or condition, should spit periodically, such symbol of evil, to relieve the Creator God. Therefore, was proved that at least one time, all the Templars had spited the crucifix. Fifth, in consequence, they refused the Holy Virgin. Sixth, they officiated the Mass according to a known canon and in a strange language, which later was proved that was the Hebrew. Seventh, they worshipped an hermaphrodite idol, of hideous factions, which they referred with the sobriquet of Baphomet, or Bethel, but whose name, which they never pronounced without go pale, was Pire. Eighth, they pretended that such idol represented more powerful than Christ, who, in contradistinction to the Messiah, was manifested more often amongst men. Ninth, they affirmed that such abominable demon imposed them, since the days of Saint Bernard, the obligation to practice the sodomy, the vice that they had accustomed, and constituted a natural practice within the superiors of the order. 10th, the great master, and the great priors, or preceptors, realized a secret ceremony in which they offered human sacrifices to Baphomet, especially children. 11th, the ritual demanded the incineration of the victim, in an oven disposed to that purpose. 12. With the calcined ashes, the Templars elaborated an human bleach, and they conserved it, in secret as the most valuable asset. 13th, they firmly believed that such lye had the power to clean the unction of the Christian sacraments. According to what they confessed, by that lye, they had annulled the effects of the baptism and the communion, which they considered spells of the cross, etc. Since the beginning, the Dominicanus decided to distinguish between Templar and Galene in the Middle Ages. Was normal that in a judgment of heresy the accused ones that confessed spontaneously, repented and accepted the Christian sacraments were acquitted. In the process of the Templars, such possibility was offered repeatedly and many of them confessed what they knew. However, the Dominicanus were not disposed to permit that the Galenes could escape from the trap. For them, who never had been forgiven, would be no forgiveness. Just for the Templars, that's to say, the non-initiated knights in the cult of Baphomet, would be offered the opportunity to save their lives in turn of their testimony. Thus, they obtained to collect an overwhelming number of proofs against the Galenes, and the order provided by their own members, confessed and repented heretics. And then, the process turned irreversible, due to, neither the Pope nor anyone, could save the order, once the people and the Church became aware about their heresies and aberrations. The strategy at Philip the Fair, and the Circulus Dominicanus had triumphed, now definitely, over the plans of the wide fraternity. The Galenes didn't suspect the comedy, represented by Clement V, until it was too late. The Order of the Temple, responsible to found the Universal Synarchy, would be destroyed. Thereby, the Galenes, and the Order of the Temple were exterminated without mercy, receiving in their own flesh the medicine that in many opportunities administrated to the followers of the Pact of Blood. Ironically, the inquisitorial tribunal, that they used to finish with the Cathars, now was condemning them relentlessly to die, in the stake. As in the martial art of the jujutsu, the enemy took advantage of their own forces, to defeat them. The Galenes would never forget the process to the Templars. Specially remembered would be the day 10 of May 1310. That day, in the Council of Saints, whose bishopric was exerted by Philippe de Marigny, brother of Ingarand, were burnt at low heat 56 Templar knights, the best of the Galene hierarchy. Since the lords of Tharsis burnt the sacred forest, and they immolated the 20 of Carthage, the Galenes never had a fateful day as that 10 of May. Manacled each one of them back to a sturdy oak tree, the 50 Galenes of Saints formed a large row of condemned, a procession of spectrums marching to hell. At the feet of each posts, the stacked firewood assured the next end of the priests of God the One. Before them the minor brothers, through blazing torch, a knight of Philip the Fair, a warrior monk of some unknown order, was getting closer to the heretics, and he pronounced with bated breath some words, that the presence took as a pious prayer. Notwithstanding, when the Galenes heard it, their faces were decomposed of hate, and some of them released atrocious curses. Those words said, simply, "Phoneton, and the blood of Tharsis." When the row was completed, while the Gauleans elevated their soul to Jehovah Satan, and claimed an indescribable punishment for the man of stone, such knight, who was no one else than Charles of Tharsis, made a sign to the executioners, and the stakes started to burn. Thereupon the Gauleans, and their Senarchic dreams, were no more than ashes. A handful of vile ashes that would not be enough to clean the damage caused to the house of Tharsis, and too many others, who fell annihilated for being opposed to those demental dreams. To complete the work was required to legalize the result of the strategy at Philip the Fair. With that objective the Pope convoked Ecumenical Council Vienna, in October of 1311, to May of 1312. Although defeated in all the fronts, the Gauleans still had forces to put pressure and to try to avoid the extinction of the order. There was a secret conference amongst 5 cardinals loyal to Philip the Fair, and 6 delegates of the council, in which was informed to the last ones about the terrible consequences that would bring the opposition to the King of France, and the absolution of the order, even by the irrefutable collected proofs against them. But the terror was too much, and, between the punishment of the king and the revenge of the Gauleans, many remained irresolute. The representatives of the king before the council, William of Nogret, William Plagian, Charles of Tharsis, Enguerrand de Marigny, etc., displayed their eloquence to persuade the bishops about the necessity that the Church and Christianity had to suppress that focus of heresy. There was even a moment, to the month of March in 1312, in which the king threatened to advance with his troops over Vienna and take Revengeans, right there with Gauleans' followers. At that time he reached to Lyon, with his brother Charles, his sons, and a powerful regiment of knights. Finally, in 22 of March 1312, the extinction of the order, and the confiscation of all their goods in favour to the order of Hospitallers of St. John of God, the Church, and the Kingdom of France was voted. Notwithstanding, existed much doubt about the agreement of the council, especially because, who had voted in secrecy, denied in public that they did it, and the Pope was obeyed to solve the issue through a decree. In the bull, Consideran Sturm, he declared that the order of the Temple had been provisionally abolished until the tribunal of the Holy Office lest issued, thing that he had already done. Non permittem definitivi sententiae, sed permittem provisionis apostolici. The bull, and the decree of the Council of Vienna, were dispatched to all the countries for its execution. The local order must be extinguished, his members taken prisoners, and processed by heresy. In Aragon, the knights fortified themselves, and resist, having to be submitted by James II, in military campaigns. The ones of Navarra, where Philip the Fair reigned, surrendered without resistance, as the ones of Castile and Portugal. In all the cases, those who were acquitted as well as the properties of the order, which were a lot, passed to integrate the Hospitallers' order, or other orders created with that finality. In Huelva, the castle of Aracena is evicted and its garrison replaced by Portuguese troops, but later it would be given to the Order of Santiago. Before leaving, the Gauleans sealed the entrance to the cavern of Daedalus, where a late bitumen would remember the infernal powers of Biret and Bishar for centuries. The convent de la Rapida then passed to the Order of St. Francis. That, nevertheless, didn't prevent that the Gauleans continued preparing the advent of Quiblin, according to the commandments of Biret and Bishar. On the contrary, the Gauleans that considered Rosbal as the most sacred sanctuary of Spain, disposed the convent as a place of retire and enclosure for their major staff. The cult of the Virgin of Miracles was already imposed in the vast region of Andalusia, but the one that Major further aroused in the believers was the cult of Virgin of the Cinta, protector of the seamen and ship's owners, who was considered patroness of Huelva. This popular assertion of the Great Mother Bina was provoked, above all, to the indefatigable task of purification, effectuated by the friars of St. Francis. which would yield, instead, would be the open fight against the Virgin of Agartha, due to the temporary loss of power of the Gauleans, avoided them to sustain it adequately. These changes, as is natural, brought peace to the offspring of Runwalde, due to the secret cavern was free, for the moment, from the Gauleans' ambushes. In 1312, a Noyo had been installed permanently before the Wise Sword. The main Templar chiefs, the Great Master Jacques of Melay, and other 3 Gauleans, continued prisoners in the house of the Temple of Paris. For 3 years, the torment was applied unto them with the purpose to make them confess certain subtle aspects of the Templar organization. 2 things interested especially to the Dominicanis. They wanted to know the entailments with the East, with the wide fraternity, if a secure path existed to the abode of the immortals, and to know if they were actually in France, or, in some place of Europe, agents of the potencies of the matter, masters of the wide fraternity, immortal Gauleans, etc., to whom would be proceeded to arrest immediately. However, as terrible as they could be considered, such torments were mere caresses, before the refined tortures that the Gauleans applied, in more than one opportunity to the lords of Tharsis. Anyway, one side of Novgorod announced in 23 of March 1314, the heretics that would be executed, in the Isle of the Jews, annihilate in front of the royal palace where the Dominicans used to burn the sons of the chosen people. The signalized day, Jacques of Melay, Godfrey of Charnay, Hugo of Payerne, and Godfrey of Gonneval, priests that had dominated the most secret knowledges of the cultural pact, were moored to the stakes and leave to the purification of fire. Philip the Fair, the Cyrils Dominicanus, and many lords of Tharsis, who came from the south of France, for the occasion, contemplated the igneous scene that closed an historical stage, a period characterized by the ignoble attacks against the pure blood, and the eternal spirit. The conspiracy of the demons was consumed in those 4 stakes, in the Isle of the Jews, in the city of Paris, in 23 of March 1314. The triumph of the Hyperborean strategy was assured. The plans of the White Fraternity to establish the universal synarchy, incapable to be realized for 7 centuries, and the advent to Spain at Quiblin, would delay 180 years.